the
All right.
Technologist podcast number 8. This time with me, Adam Dymitruk. Adam, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
So for those that don't know, Adam, you're a thought leader, I would say, and a pioneer in the...
I hate that word, but
you
sure.
hate that word?
It's a very pretentious word that I try to avoid at all costs, but I know that it's used everywhere. So I'm not blaming you, but I'm just someone that was lucky to discover something by being stubborn. That's how I like to put it.
Discover something by being stubborn. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the keywords you're stubborn about that people will know you most are probably CQRS, event storming, event modeling, event sourcing. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, that pretty much that and open source, and then hobbies like photography and horticulture, so growing plants and taking photos of them. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. That's me.
Adam. Event sourcing, event modeling. This seems to be an interesting but also esoteric topic for a lot of people. Maybe we can start off by discussing in the simplest terms what event modeling, what event sourcing, what CQRS entails. Is it architecture? Is it craftsmanship? Is it design pattern? What's the level?
Yeah, good point. I think a lot of people get introduced to these concepts as an architectural pattern, at least how it's presented initially for quite a few back in 10 plus years ago. I've since learned, like many, that it's really kind of like a mindset. It's kind of a cop-out. It's like, oh, you're doing Agile because you're doing Scrum. No, Agile is a state of mind. Are you going to be getting feedback, and are you going to be flexible and reactive to business change, changing needs of business, right? So most of these terms kind of can't be pigeonholed into I'm just a pattern. So I think the kind of my latest take on it is event sourcing is kind of the most important one, because it has a high opinion about information and how we treat information. And I've recently started to just begin describing, after all these years, event sourcing is simply a decision to not throw away any information, which then implies that you're going to be working off of an ever-growing ledger. Because if you're not going to throw any information away, that means you're naturally going to find your way into events or facts on a timeline, and you're going to have to find patterns to make use of that information because of the fact that it's stored this way. But that's good news, because humans naturally do this, and before computers, that's all we did. Pretty much any organization that was worthwhile, that was large, that had to scale, was record keeping. It was more about accounting for what happened. And I like to say that the pencil is not as widely used throughout history as the pen. And so you have more evidence of things being written for posterity, and that kind of stuff. So, but further to the point about humanity and events is that the human mind is built for linear thinking. We more likely remember stories, unless you're lucky enough to have a photographic memory. So when you present requirements as a graph, or a design as a activity diagram, you're not likely to remember that as well. And we can see this evidence in tech over the last bit in Agile, trying from user stories to BDD and behavior-driven development and specification by example. You're looking at ways to talk about systems by telling a small story about what's supposed to happen. And so, event sourcing, CQRS and DDD, event modeling and event storming, and all of these things are new insights into information systems that actually start to push away some of those unnatural designs in software that I think were there from the adoption of computers and integrated circuits in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where Moore's law was impossible to ignore, and the speed of throughput of creating data because of the transistor and integrated circuits was much faster than what we had for storage. So as we automated systems with computers, it was impossible to duplicate the real world of how we treated information systems on pen and paper. It was simply extremely expensive to store data compared to how much it cost to produce data. At least the ratio of that was quite evident. And you look at I use in my presentations, I use the IBM hard drive. 10 megabyte hard drive was $1 million. It cost.
And I'm glad you brought, Adam. I'm glad you bring up that part of computer history, because I did some digging, and I saw you mention in some other podcasts that the Commodore 64 was one of your first computers.
Oh yeah, of course.
It was one of my first as well.
Yeah.
My brother got it for his birthday, and we ended up playing. I was still 5 years old at the time, but I have fond memories of using it.
Yeah, so do I. That's what made me fall in love with the whole thing. So yeah.
And the thing I want to highlight is that the Commodore 64 did not have a hard drive.
That's right. Yeah.
It only had memory. And if you wanted to do anything, you had to manually take memory recordings events, if I use that word clumsily, from a soft drive. So from like a diskette or a tape. And you had to copy it. You had to stream it into the terminal's memory. And
yeah,
I think
well, you're lucky that you had that, because when we got the Commodore 64, we didn't have a disk drive. So I would, it's part of growing up and learning how to program was, this idea from I guess it's from the Far East, the idea of a koan, which is the repetition of a simple movement to really refine some skill by practicing the small pieces of a complex art. So I was making my own koans because I didn't have a disk drive, and we couldn't afford it as immigrants. And so while we got the computer, it was up to me to write down the program on a piece of paper, because the minute I had to turn the computer off and it was time to go to sleep, it all went away. And so I got into this habit as a small boy, 10 years old, of writing down everything on a piece of paper, so that when I came home from school the next day, I would very quickly type in as much the whole program and then continue to add to it the next day. That was actually a good thing. People say, well, poor, that's too bad. You could have been a lot more productive. But actually, I learned a lot from doing that. I learned how to touch type really quickly. I learned how to refine my programs. So the whole idea about refactoring, it would allow me to, by typing in the program again, it was an opportunity to get exposed to what I wrote and find ways to optimize it. Like I'm really sick and tired of writing these next 10 lines. Is there a shorter way that I could do this? Maybe not the best thing for eliminating amount of keys to press for variable names and such, but back then we were using X and Y for variables anyway. So but you did start to analyze why am I doing something, and those are really good incentives. I think it's very easy today for kids and others to learn programming. You just turn on YouTube and have someone walk you through what you're supposed to do. But back in those days, just to even find a decent book on programming was going to the library, and the best books were always not available. Always, someone always had them checked out. So you're always on a waiting list for a decent book. And it wasn't, until 3-4 years in that I was able to get enough books to get a reference manual for assembly and start to learn machine language and all that. I still remember, I just posted, I think, on LinkedIn that I still remember LDA, one of the instruction sets was A9. I mean, I could look at hex dumps of memory and know
Recognize
the values
codes
for the
Yeah.
instruction set and just understand where I am in the program. And sometimes it was faster than loading up a disassembler was just to change the memory location to alter the program to what you want. And the Commodore 6502 had the accumulator and 2 registers X and Y. And you kind of started to learn about, okay, if you use the accumulator, it has different properties when you do some operation on it as compared to the registers X and Y. Some flags would or wouldn't be flipped. You would have different efficiencies with different instruction sets. And I think the 6502 was the only, like, one of the first few chips to do to not have 2 clock cycles for every instruction or something. It was the first one to go to a single clock cycle for a lot of instructions, which put it ahead of everything else out there. That was the Spectrum and other 8-bit computers. So it was actually quite a really well-designed machine, and
compact.
happy to do it. And compact, yeah. And
Yeah.
it was really cool. I mean, I kind of want a keyboard that looks like that.
And it was one of the first ones, like usually the computer came in a box. But
it was self-assembled. Like, they were pretty janky looking. This was the first real
the
home
keyboard
computer.
was
Like,
the computer.
I still remember the day when I went to the store to get that thing with my dad. And I recall the box and removing the styrofoam around it and plugging it in. It was definitely, a different feeling, because I already saw the VIC-20 then. And when one of my friend's older brother had I think a Spectrum, was at 80 or something, these monochrome computers, and they're weird keyboards. They're gummy, and didn't feel like a real computer. So yeah, the Commodore 64 was really just a joy to have. I can, it is the most successful home computer, given how,
in relative terms,
the state of computing and the state of people knowing how to use one. There is nothing that parallels the success of that machine.
Thank you for this round of nostalgia, Adam.
It's nice to dig those out, but they're really good memories, and I guess, given the history, we're kind of lucky to grow up in that time. Not so lucky, I think just all the inventions we have are squandered on today's generation. They just don't appreciate how much that is. And I sound really
in
old
contrast,
really sound old, but that's true.
What's fascinating to me is this idea that you mentioned at the very beginning, that you had to write in, you lose everything. You shut the system down, you lose everything. You have to write the program back into the system.
Yeah.
In a way, there's a parallel to that is obvious to me regarding replaying state in event-sourced, event-modeled systems.
It's a good thing you bring that up. That is exactly what it is.
Was that an inspiration? Is this a coincidence?
Maybe there's something in the water in Warsaw, where I grew up. Well, you laugh, but it's funny from another perspective, because I wasn't I didn't go back to Poland for 36 years or something like that. It was just, there was a whole bunch of things that my parents were afraid of, in terms of, the conscription was still there when we were going. So I had a bunch of letters from the government saying, you got to get, where's your army service? And so my uncle kept these stacks of letters from the army. Where are you? Got time to show up? But then conscription in Poland was removed, and I was able to go back. I had someone asked me, I guess I was in London doing a workshop on event sourcing with Chris Condren, the CTO of Event Store, actually. And this was just, I think, 2018. 2 years before COVID. And I got contacted by a very awesome guy by the name of Patrick from Wrocław, a smaller town in southwest Poland, that he wanted to bring me in for a workshop, and gathered everything. And then I said, this is a good opportunity. So I kind of looked at it and told my parents, I'm going, I don't care. It's like conscription's done. People have been going back and forth, criticizing me from not going to visit, I mean, we had my parents here, but my aunts, uncles, everything was back there. Why don't you go visit? So, well, okay, I'll go to this. So I'm in London already. It's a short flight to get to Wrocław from London through through Frankfurt. So I went, I said, okay, and got everything booked, and flew in. And unfortunately that day in Frankfurt, in Central Europe, there was a lot of thunderstorms. So all the flights got canceled. And I couldn't make it that day. I was waiting, was the storm going to pass? And the storm going to pass? And sure enough, the day just ended, and I had to go back to a hotel and wait until the next day. So for the 2-day workshop I showed up for the last half day. But it was so weird being in Poland for the first time, getting that. And so I went to this workshop, and then there was a fellow there, Rafael, who you probably have met through the meetups. And he drove from Warsaw to meet me there, because he was doing CQRS and event sourcing. And then we ended up working together on some contracts. And I was drafting up the contract, and I said, I need your address of your office. And he said, okay, here it is. And I looked at it, and I thought he was pranking me, because it was I looked at the street name, and it's where I grew up, and it's not like in the middle of the city.
Oh,
it's,
wow.
Driving like 20, 30 kilometers out of the city. Like there must be another street of the same name that popped up in the last 30 years in there. But I used Google to see the address, and I'm like, oh my God, this is where I grew up.
Wow.
This is 50 meters from our apartment. And so they added some more buildings with a bottom level being businesses, and some of them were offices. And so this office opened up, and guess what they were doing? CQRS and event sourcing. So that's why, looping this back, there's something in the water where I grew up, because
I see.
there's very few companies that focused on event sourcing and CQRS in the world that of at all, that only do that. I thought we were the only ones at AdapTech, with a handful of others here and there, but then to discover that this happened in my backyard. So I have a very good photo of Rafael and me standing in front of the apartment building where I grew up, and we took a walk to my old elementary school, and it's still there, hasn't changed. So after 36 years, it was awesome to see those those neighborhoods. I came back the next year. Rafael was really kind to organize a little event modeling tour through 3 different cities, and I got to go to Krakow, where I was born, and see my cousins. And I got a really cool photo of I think the last time I saw them was 1982. So there was a picture of the 3 of us, a black and white one, in one of the famous in front of one of the famous dragon statues in Krakow, the one that breathes fire. If you've been to Krakow, there's one that breathes fire, which is really cool. So we had a picture of the 3 of us as kids in front of that, and so I took another picture of the 3 of us standing together in the same position, and put them one above the other. This is 37 years difference of these guys. But what's amazing about family is that you feel like you didn't see each other for a year, but really 37 years passed. So
Comes with
yeah, it was really nice.
With a profound
thanks
feeling
for bringing
of
up that nostalgia. That was a really good story, and it does have a CQRS tie-in for sure.
But there seems to be some feeling of belonging, something deeply rooted that keeps you in that sense of family, even when this technology is concerned, or rather this process.
Oh yeah. I mean, if all of this didn't feel natural to the way systems should be done, I would have moved on long ago. I would
Natural.
be a typical tire kicker and say, yeah, of course I've worked on an
Mhm.
event source system. But when you realize that there's a better way of doing things, you change what you do every day and what
Mhm.
you stand for to take in that realization, and you refuse to go backwards, and
So,
you have to, yeah, go
so
ahead.
specifically on the topic of process, technology, and
Mhm.
planning, event modeling seems to tie it all together. Event sourcing with CQRS, with the technology and the business. So DDD, the going from post-it notes to pure implementation code. Diego asked in chat, and I think we can tie it in, is that he asked, do you think the whole commence a project with an entity relationship diagram, with an ER diagram, and overthinking how data is stored and normalized, so the state of it, in a relational mentality, is that hurting the software development industry? And now my interpretation on that question is there something unorganic or unnatural to the way that talking about data in its final state rather than events? Is there some disconnect there? Did you miss something? Is this an artifact of how hard the hardware evolved, which you spoke about earlier? Is what you're doing now a more natural way of doing that? What's the overarching idea here?
I certainly feel that. So one of the things about deciding to do only event sourcing, DDD, and I don't have to talk about CQRS, because if you're doing event sourcing, you're forced to do CQRS on the logical parts. I'm not going into physical fact that you need a separate database. I'm not getting into those arguments. I know that if you have a ledger of facts, you're going to need to interpret those facts for whatever purpose you want. And I think naturally, you don't forget what your last address was, right? I remembered my address in Poland. Just because we moved, my mind doesn't just erase the history of where I used to live. So event streams are natural to human beings. It's evident in how we automated systems before that, before computers, and so when
specifically, sorry for interrupting you, but
I'm getting there.
The state, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you had it there.
There. I'm not forgetting.
Then I won't interfere.
I wanted to get those kind of ironed out before I answer the question.
Okay.
So to say why state-based specifications are bad or ERD diagrams are bad. It's not that they're bad. They do show something, but they don't show the whole picture. So as I started doing only event sourcing, that was a decision in 2015 to only do event-driven systems. I don't want to take a bad compromise on misrepresenting how I feel information is better presented in terms of how a system works internally. I want that lossless system, so I have guarantees for a lot of things and solve a lot of software problems going through. So what happened as we're trying to implement systems and going from client to client, project to project, is that the way that specifications were being articulated which was a traditional way with user stories, and if it was designed to be done, it was maybe borrowing from UML or some C4 diagram or whatever, and it wasn't good. It wasn't working fast enough for us. There was a
What was it? The extraction of information,
no,
or
yeah. So getting to the point of, okay, what is it that you want? So we could get some of these traditional pieces out, like maybe a wireframe. Okay,
what do you want the system to do? How is it going to be used?
These screens, and here's some user stories that I wrote. Here's a typical initial backlog that we're going to work off of for the first thing. It was really clumsy, clunky, non-collaborative. There was, we have to talk to the designers for this. I got to talk to someone that knows something about databases for that, and And so it's kind of all over the place. And it was really siloing a lot of the information. As a small company trying to do everything, I just couldn't have the luxury to have all of these different types of people, all these in these different roles. That would be too expensive. And then, of course, it would be silly for me to ask for, one person to look after design and then look at user stories and do ERD diagrams and do this and that and the other, wear 5 different hats, and then they could get going on programming. That wasn't gonna be good enough. So I remember back in 2008, I met Greg Young, and that's when I got introduced to properly doing event sourcing. It was the first time that I kind of saw, okay, you can do something in a different way, right? I was struggling before to see if Agile was the answer to my software problems, and it only went so far. But
on that topic of Agile, if I can chime in,
sure.
But I never saw event modeling as also incorporating the process aspect of it, of the project management aspect of it. And I think this is the first time where I see it in that light, and it's making a lot of sense, because what you said on the aspect of topics and stories and user journeys and user experience, none of them explicitly model data streams. None of them explicitly model, well, how will the data that the user enters mutate over time? How will it get, what do we remember? What do we throw away? What do we split? What do we merge? That is always an after fact of, of a pre-requirement, a precondition for the backend developer to start working on some persistence model.
And I apologize
never
to the person asking the question. It's a really long answer.
But thank you, Diego, for asking.
But it's fundamentally such a big topic as to what event modeling is and why it came up, right? Because to kind of tie up that piece of it, we couldn't really use traditional methods. I mean, we could. It was just very inefficient, and it was it was hurting the business to try and emulate all of the traditional pieces that you would have that go into specifying a project. So ERDs and looking at the state of things is kind of part of the problem, but a big part of the problem. And going back to meeting Greg and looking at event sourcing, he was using sticky notes on the whiteboard to talk about what happens. He was working on a trading system across the street from me in Vancouver. We met at a meetup and just realized, we're across the street from one another. So we started to hang out back then. And so I used to go to the office from time to time, to his office, and see what they were doing, and to see event sourcing and CQRS before CQRS was even coined was kind of cool. I remember, okay, this is the sequence of events challenges everything that I know about doing the best things in software. So I was big into specification by example and BDD. That was already getting to that storyline of saying, okay, this is not just a story that's written on a document. With BDD, you're already going into, okay, I have a fixture there that's going to give me some template-like sentences in domain language that we're going to have some, fill in the blank values so that you could exercise a system underneath. You'd have a fixture underneath, underneath that, exercising the actual test, the class under test, right? The cut. And I remember, being a big proponent of Storyteller from Jerry Miller and all these people that did so much work in behavior-driven design and specification by example, but nothing really made it work until events entered the picture, because I always thought of these fixtures as having to, well, I didn't think about it. It was the reality. It was maintaining and coming up with these fixtures was a huge chore, right? I could have continued with that. But there was a more natural one. And I think Mike Stockdale out of Calgary already had that insight from the static perspective. As he said, your classes, your top level classes, your entry points, your aggregate roots, they should be named so well that you could just use simple reflection on the class names and method names to generate automatically your sentences. And he had a whole framework in C# that he wrote that took this approach, and it pushed. That was the first time that I saw the framework push the ubiquitous language by force into the implementation, right? But because we were dealing with a static, what is now event representation, abstractions suck. They're like a broken clock. They're only right twice during the day. And that's because they're hard to come up with good ones, but your business continuously changes. So it's horrible to have to pin down something that's going to be the best abstraction, but it's always a compromise because your business is changing to do that. So looking at facts of what happened on the timeline is a way out of that horrible world of trying to have an accurate representation of what is now. The proper question is what happened, because that incorporates your changes, not just from what happened in terms of what the users did, but from your understanding of what the system had to do before, your schema migrations, everything that happens in an organically growing business. And so, yeah, I mean, back to the question, maybe you can repeat the question because we can tie it off with a good statement. So what was the gist of the question? Because I know it's the difference between static and for specifications, that look at state versus looking at events.
What is the particular, let's say, seam where we differentiate traditional state-based entity relation diagrams from something a little bit more time-oriented? Because it seems to me the abstraction you've chosen is abstracting time rather than activity, rather than a particular version of the activity.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things. It's adding time. It's number one already mentioned, but number two, it's by example. And I think we already have sequence diagrams which go a little bit too deep in implementation, but they have the aspect of time. The problem there is that they're graphs. There is no rule about not having alternate values or branching in it. You just have some branching that you can express.
It's very linear. It's
very
one
linear,
way.
but it's also it also doesn't focus on state. So that's another part, is that these specifications were at the wrong level of inspection or knowledge of how the system works. It went
at the end, right? It
went too deep. It just those parts like sequence diagrams start to talk about your implementation abstractions, which is very useless for someone that's looking at the top level from a business perspective. But the common ground is state. Like if I get to this point in my workflow, as a business person, I need to be assured that the system is in a certain state, that the information that I have in the system is okay, and is going to serve and have value and be able to kick off other processes or whatever. I need to understand that. It doesn't matter if it's an automated system or if it's pen and paper. As someone that's in charge of automating a system, I need to be assured. And I think we got lost in the details by being very nerdy and thinking that computers are so different than other systems. It's not the same thing. It's a different.
We have gamified state management.
Yeah. So exactly. So the difference is, state is is a really bad way to tell a story. It's a snapshot of it's like opening a book of Hansel and Gretel, and you just see the witch's bones in the cold oven. and the kids standing outside. You don't know what happened. Like, whose bones are those? Why are the two kids eating the gingerbread house now happy, right? You don't know how they got there and what happened.
and you bring up an important point, but regarding how do we get there? What is state? So in this context, there's a lot of terminology flying around, and Diego said thank you in chat. It seems he's very happy with your answer. Thank you, Diego.
Hopefully it was thorough enough. I know we could just have a whole presentation on that.
But I want to dig a little bit on that. When you said state, and you mentioned projections earlier, for those of us, for those of our viewers that are watching, so we mentioned DDD, which stands for domain driven design. CQRS is CQRS. I think CQRS, people understand CQRS more than command query request segregation.
Well, it would be nice to explain CQRS to others. CQRS is Greg's way of saying that how it's fundamentally, you have a minimum of two systems.
And asymmetry in how you
Well, the reason
write
you need two
and read.
systems is that you treat inbound data, how you're affecting change in the system with very different patterns and very different mindset than how you treat information coming out.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of this traditional thing. Oh, you know, machines have an input and an output, and you know, it's like a sausage making machine or a meat grinder. You get the meat at one end, and you get the minced meat on the other side.
That's a good analogy. That's a very good analogy.
Well,
actually.
I don't like it.
Yeah,
I think it's I think
it's
it's
very
okay
crude.
to a level. It's short-sighted because in CQRS, the other model for reading, those things are read all the time, and input-output implies that you have to poke the system to get something. But when it's just a web request to see the current ticket listings on a Saturday morning to see if your favorite band's concert is live yet, when you're hitting F5, you're reading the current state over and over again. There is no input. You're getting output. So the better way to state these things is it's not in machines aren't input output. They have state affecting state change instructions, and they have read instructions. You can either affect change or you can view the state. And CQRS comes from, for the technical folks, was inspired by the CQS, command query separation on the object level, where you want to make sure that your methods either are changing state only, and then, or your methods are just querying for state, and they're guaranteeing that you're not going to change the state of the object after you queried it to organize things, right? And then people, you know, bitch and complain that, well, if I do this add, I actually want at the same time to return the latest state. And so we don't ever do CQS in any modern frameworks, but
it's too crude.
Yeah, it's too, you know, it's telling us how to, you know, telling grandma how to suck eggs kind of thing. Like, we're programmers, we know what we want. Don't tell us what to do. Armchair architect, who cares about CQS? So CQRS, however, it works really well on the for many different reasons on the higher level when you're talking about the state of the system or subsystems. It's at that point it's quite good to separate those two things for many reasons. So scalability was one of the biggest reasons that, you know, Greg did CQRS, was to make sure that you're not trying to, you know, make something that's scaling for writes sit alongside all the reads, because they will adversely affect each other. Like, oh, why is my write taking forever? Well, someone's locked this thing because there's a reading going on, or reading this or whatever, right? So anyway, or just simply from, you know, the CPU, you know, what's going on in the CPU, what's going on with this camera, always loses focus. There, you have to help the autofocus sometimes. Yeah. So I'm so blurry in the morning.
So for the topic of state, Adam, it's really interesting because when I do coach DDD and CQRS concepts, and one of the first things that is difficult or perhaps unnatural to somebody who is already to some degree trained in computer science or engineering, or that they dabbled with, you know, active record or domain models or a very state-oriented, you know, SQL database, is that this idea that they have the system ready, what it looks like in the UI, blank with no data, and then what the data looks like in a valid state without the UI.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of conflicts, a lot of volatility, a lot of confusion happening in that in-between.
Trying to make them work together. Yeah.
To synchronize, either when we're starting to type, you know, a good example that I like to use is a Google Doc. You know, a Google Doc starts empty and it's a valid null object in the system. And then we're slowly starting to type, but there's no save button. There's no element of validation going on that would require the state to be in some way judged for validity before it can go into the persistence layer, right? So because the events that I'm doing is I'm writing a document, I'm adding, I'm removing, I'm adding, I'm removing. And this idea that the form has to be submitted to go through the web to some other place and then come back either with a yes or no, with a, you know, like a red or green signal saying that, yes, I have accepted your data. Here is how I transformed it. There's something very inorganic. It's something very crude and perhaps even lossy in the type of communication that comes from wanting to put only the valid stuff into the database. So having your database modeled, the SQL tables and the SQL relationships modeled around a snapshot of the state that only remembers what it was like after it was purified and fixed. So I think where CQRS comes in, and especially event sourcing, I think, is to just capture everything and then to recalculate what the current state is actually based on what happened. But how do you connect the two? This mind shift, there's a lot of resistance generally. It requires schema changes, drastic ways of how you think about data. In what way do you touch on this? How do you make event sourcing cheaper and faster? How do you make thinking about projections rather than your SQL tables more organic? Some technical advice, perhaps.
There's quite a lot that you said in there, and I think by trying to make things simpler, we actually kludged together separate concepts, and CQRS ties into that. But event sourcing makes it explicit from a certain point of view, is that there's the fact that we can and do have multiple projections off of the facts allows us to take some of that complexity that we put into the traditional system of managing state into a separate piece of work. So like when you said you're submitting the form, I have a minimalist sort of look as to what the validation for that is. I might have some formatting validation that I do to make sure the email's correct, that I have numeric values, or the, all sorts of things that I may do at the surface level to validate. I can then go deeper and say that do I have enough items of this stock item to actually put that in the basket,
to a domain layer
so at the domain level to see that do I have enough there. And once those pass, all I do is store the fact that yes, I could do this, and therefore I'm going to store the fact that I did this. And this is the vision, is that the rest of the specifications would have been, and update this table here, which kicks off this trigger that does this, so that the whole state of the whole system at this point is correct. With event sourcing, you don't do that. You stop where we are now. Your goal was to make sure that the state transition was correct, and that's it. You don't focus on any fallout of recording that fact. The other screens further on in your workflow, the other parts of the system that are related somehow, there may be one or two of them, or there may be 100, there may be 100 of them, but you don't care. You can move on.
You don't tie in the derivatives.
You don't drag in everything that the coupling is. You understand the coupling's there, and if you're doing design, you know that you've taken care of having to go back to change anything that you just did. You can wait for those parts of the system to be written. So that allows you to really have a better unit of work for when you're implementing that. And from the, whether you're doing domain-driven design or not, this is why we like event modeling, is that it's agnostic to whether you're using whatever approach. I don't care what you're using, state is state. This is what happened. And if you're not doing event sourcing and using event modeling, the event still happened in your head. Like when I clicked this button for registering to this website, I know what my name is, I know what my email is, and I knew what my password was when I typed it in. So in my mind, the event is that I did this. And back to how this is in real life, we don't forget where we used to live. The impact of you moving has a projection into your house insurance, into where your kid goes to school. There's many different models that get affected by the fact that you moved.
But you don't have
the same system that manages your house insurance as where your kid goes. But this is the approach we've taken with computers, with this awesome canonical model that's supposed to be so good by having this this really tight thing where we don't repeat any data. It's absolutely stupid.
But the word you use there, canonical, that actually ties it in really well. I just got an aha moment from listening to you describe this, because I did change my address a few years ago, and there was this element of, like in theory, in the database, it's only one address, but in reality, my address is this, but it's not official yet, but it's already has to be used legally, but somebody made a mistake and didn't update it on one of those banks. So now it's not an error that Dennis, who seemingly lives at location A in the system, is not the same person as Dennis, who is living now in location B. Even though the system was not updated yet, we will still follow what's in the real world, not what's in the system, because somebody made a mistake, or I came too late to update, or I updated
well,
5 of
you're
the
touching
fields.
into temporal information, which is really key. This is, Greg Yen gives an example of like, well, how many dates are involved when you write a check?
Yeah.
Right. There's the date that you put on the check. There's the actual time that you're writing the check at. There's the time that you're giving someone the check. There's a time that's the bank receives the check from the other person. There's the time that the check clears. There's a time that there's the communication with, if there was a bounce. So, that's kind of what you're saying, is that, the times that things are affected. And I mean, if I have a system where I put in an event of registering,
exactly,
maybe there's something that runs at midnight that checks whether I checked off the box for newsletters, and the newsletter system doesn't care about any users coming in during the day. It just sees who so far that day was added to the list, and things like that. So thinking about things from an event, on an event basis is more natural for us to specify things.
If I can chime in, because
go for it.
That idea of canonical, because most systems, traditional systems that are state-based, traditional systems that have been modeled using a domain model, I think the clumsiness comes from this idea that you just mentioned, is that taking the temporality into account, usually we make the mistake of choosing a canonical read model as the primary source of truth. So when you write a check, I decide, okay, is the database stable about writing the check or receiving the check or cashing the check or remembering the check, or actually converting the check into a transaction? And whichever you choose will be wrong, because it doesn't capture the actual useful information, which is that a human made a decision to do something and another human made a decision to accept
the
that.
state-based kind of I think unfortunately a lot of domain-driven design ideas were kind of captured around the time when object-oriented programming was its height,
and domain
and
models and ORMs.
And you had this object-verb pairing that bank account dot withdrawal, right? And we all know that that's really a bad way to model banking transactions. You want the transaction to be the thing.
You're
capturing this behavior as an object instead. That's more in tune as to what's happening on ledgers for your account, rather than having a physical representation of your account that has an action done on it,
which is just one of the states, one of the projections. So
exactly.
So how do you, from a tactical level, how do you have this discussion? Do you come up with how do you go from sticky notes to code? It sounds like there's something in between that simplifies a lot of processes in the development, in the software creation process.
It's agreement between all the different roles that information architecture is what is important. Everything else isn't important, because now we give a skeleton to what we're building, something that we can depend on, that the business understands that information changes this way, because if they were to do it with pen and paper, they would do the same thing. And that also has to be good enough for development. So you don't want to teach grandma to suck eggs. That's an English colloquialism, meaning like you're telling someone how to do their job, and
implementation
no
focused
experience in it. It's like you going up to a doctor in the hospital and saying, no, make the incision here.
It's like micromanaging from the consumer side.
It's talking, I don't want someone non-technical telling a technical person how to do their job. So what is the right level? And so we have this really scared approach from user stories. Well, just elaborate a story on what's supposed to happen. That's way too high up.
And it's
So then
already
you have way
abstract.
too many interpretations of what's going on. There's nothing really concrete to draw upon. But if you talk about information itself, you can start to talk about how it changes. And just because something's represented in a table or some serialized events in some event store, that doesn't matter. If I slice up time, this is what's happening with information. This is what I added. These are the projections that I'm relying upon. And we can use that as the common bridge. So in going from, what do we want from design or requirements to implementation, it needs to be at the right level. And so what event modeling is that right level. We put a line in the sand saying, we're betting on that this is the right level of abstraction. UML was too deep. User stories were too high. When you talked about UML, business people didn't care about making sequence diagrams. They would never do it, right? And when you have user stories, it's an open-ended thing for developers to do whatever the heck they want for making this a 12 steps to get this story across through these state changes, or 5, or try out a new framework, or excuse something, make some interpretation of what's going on to say that, why they're late because it doesn't relate well with another story, because they interpreted one sentence in that user story as whatever. Then we can start to blame, oh, well, that you just have someone doesn't know how to write good user stories. And when someone gives me that excuse, it's always about, oh, you don't have the right team, or you're holding this wrong, right? You're holding your phone wrong. Remember the stupid iPhone thing with the antenna? They're just holding it wrong. Like
you're blocking
garbage arguments, right? No, if you're, and a lot of this unfortunately goes to criticize TDD and agile practices. It's like, we're just not doing agile right. Well, how many years are we going to get the industry to get most people doing things right? Just admit it, that the process sucks. This is not a good system. If you need to have the top people to do this correctly, I don't want it. I need to be able to get things done with a realistic cross section of the population.
I had a heated debate on this.
I don't want to have to hunt for the best developers. I don't want to have to hunt for the best whatever. I need to systematize this, and I learned this the hard way by running a whole business, saying that we're going to do this on fixed cost. So if I hire shitty people, I'm going to run out of money. And all that kind of stuff. So if you don't put, if your system is not good enough, that's the real thing. And so what was happening is that we were exposing how bad the current way of doing things is, because I couldn't have that answer, oh, I can just trust the team to do this. So once you have a good system, then you notice that you start to drop a lot of practices, because you don't need feedback on things. There's natural forces there keeping things together for you, which is why we can get into this later, but we don't have project managers. We don't do stand-ups. We don't do code reviews. We don't do any of these things, yet we produce the best software I've ever come across, ever.
Amazing.
And so how do we do that while throwing into the trash can all of the good things about Agile, all the good things about domain-driven design, all sorts of things, right? Not that those things are bad, but they get in the way after you do something, right? And if I want to teach someone domain-driven design, I'm not going to have them read the book for a year or 3 months or whatever. And
it's hard to apply as well. Von Vernon saw this as well, is that the book is really good, but nobody knows how to apply it. And even those people that apply it disagree on how it should be applied.
So my answer to you is that if we agree that an information architecture, the flow of information, we can account for where things came from. We actually understand coupling ahead of time. We answer the coupling question ahead of time as far as we can. That eliminates the amount of rework when we're finished with a unit of work for a certain
coupling
step.
Of what?
We're not, well, a coupling for, the coupling you need, because without coupling, you don't have a system. Like this email is going to get used in these different places in the system across these different workflows. specifically here and here.
But
If I
it sounds
can't
like data
answer that-
coupling. Or
Well, no, it's all sorts of coupling. It doesn't matter if it's behavior,
all
data,
sorts.
but data, once you go events, you're actually representing past behavior with events. So talking about coupling from a behavior perspective is the same thing as talking about data coupling.
Fair enough.
Like if you
Makes
make,
sense. If
you
if
make
that's how you
behavior
save
data,
it, then there's
you
no
only have
difference.
one problem to solve, right?
Yeah.
And so events are what bridges that gap. Now you can represent, logic coupling with actual data by saying that these things happen here, and it's at the right level, right? I don't, whether there's coupling, I'm reusing a utility method somewhere.
So you unify it.
whatever.
You unify it by you convert the verb of somebody did something by treating it as an event in the past, and you convert that verb into a noun. So now all past behavior that has to be recorded, which in the context of a computer is always in the past. When it reaches the unit of computation, it was already in the past.
Yeah.
So
it's
you're
already,
unifying
it's also
it
already
on
stale.
that axis, and it's already stale. Exactly. So you're unifying the entire process along that axis of, if it reaches the computer, it's already stale. So I will always treat it as something in the past, rather than having this differentiation of, there's a future event and there's, please save this, and I need to validate it because I need to represent, and this projection problem of, is it concurrently being updated and read from and written to, and then I get the new state
we can
back?
remove all this ambiguity by saying this is the timeline that we would like to see. After, event modeling is really about what would happen if I just had the system already and I just did a screencast of using it. And then I would take a snapshot of any databases involved underneath at each step and compare the differences and say, okay, if I can imagine that and I can put it down on paper, then we have a plan, we have a design, we have a blueprint for everything that we're going to do for this year for everyone. I can say, okay, cool, I can see that this is how people sign up, this is how they use the system, it's ride sharing or something, this is how they request a car, this is how a driver gets notified of a trip, and this is how we pay, this is how we rate the driver, this is the algorithm to rank the drivers and riders to make sure that people that are good are getting matched with the good drivers. I can show by example, not just the screens, because I don't want to make up something that's not going to work. I need that data, right? It's like I always say it's like a movie storyboard where we have, the keyframes for all the scenes at the top. So we know what the movie looks like, but we have the
keyframes for the
underneath.
scenes. That's great. That's a great way of putting it.
At the bottom we have the plot, so that we understand what conversations are going on between the different actors in the movie, so that the story makes sense. Because I always pick on Waterworld as a bad movie because it looks so nice, but then the story's so horrible, right? So you got to have both, right? Or you have a horrible movie because it's just shot badly. Maybe someone doesn't like a shaky camera because they hate that style.
And something went wrong in the editing
but
process.
the story is really good, and the original book is really good, and all that. So you still have a bad movie because the visual aspect was really bad. So same thing with systems. Like you have that. Actually, it's good to mention that event modeling brings in something that was always ignored by the geeks. The geeks were always too good for the design people, the soft skills, the UX, thinking about the user. They said, oh, we always think about user stories. Just because you called them user stories doesn't mean that you truly understood what the user was doing. We had a lot of efforts to do that, but none of the mechanics that we had were ever incorporating the UX and CX, user experience, customer experience, UI design, and other things into the modeling. So even though that event modeling kind of looks like a diagram that you would have from UML or something, there's always usability, a visible aspect to it in the top swim lanes. And even if things are in the being done behind the scenes through automation, have 12 different state changes you need to go through automatically without any user interaction, you still represent that by showing, maybe a dashboard for systems operators or managers to see where things could be, stopped, or how many, there's this monitoring aspect. So you always try to have in event modeling a human aspect, UX, UI, CX aspect, and that came naturally because we needed to have that in the specification as well. So, does this play well with events? Yes, it does. And the format is kind of like, a movie storyboard where those wireframes have a natural fit. So if someone's working with event modeling and they have a team that's focusing on design and UI and talking about cognitive load and all these different problems we try to solve by making good user interfaces and good user experience, they're going to naturally find event modeling as something that allows them to communicate their intentions much more deeply with the team that's going to be working on developing it, and others as well, to understand, to give them the assurance that they understand the data flow, so that they're not asking for, they're not making assumptions about whether they can get this exchange rate after closing hours, right, or something like that. They can actually analyze their UX UI aspirations with the reality check of we can't do that because we don't have that information. They want a platform to have that discussion with others, right? So that's another part that event modeling is really addressing that I don't think others do as well, if at all.
But to summarize, it's a very good analogy. So talking about the business, understanding the business, the software, and then deciding what should be implemented and how it should be operating, event modeling captures that. If that is a movie, event modeling is the process of capturing the keyframes to make sure the plot is consistent.
Yeah, it is. It's keyframes both from visually, but also you can put a line in a vertical line on the event model saying we're going to stop the story right here, and do we understand what information exists in the system? Can we do the next step? Chris Condren from Event Store, the CTO, kind of coined this term about event modeling called information completeness. It's a way to do an audit to make sure that you have those dependencies on data to make sure that what you're asking people to make actually will work. It has the information at the right time. And so this information completeness audit is a very fast way of seeing if you're making up garbage assumptions about what's available. And it's rescued a lot of projects from, maybe they were doing DDD, maybe they did event storming and they thought of all these cool events and all that. And then there was this clumsy implementation step, like you said.
Exactly.
Never a really good way to do that. And event modeling is that bridge. So if you're already doing domain-driven design, if you're already doing event storming or something similar, or any of the number of other ways of collaborating, take those artifacts and just translate them to an event model, and you'll have the scope of the work ahead, and you'll also have a plan of where people can start and how their work clicks together. These contracts, the APIs are good, but an API with context is even better. And so with these slices that are represented on the event model, I call slices on the event model the each step, right, is either it's a blue box or a green box. So I've either talked about a step that's changing the system, or I've talked about a step that's projecting some information from the system to the screen, or some automation. And so having that granularity gives you the pieces of work you need to get going on. And so it's also it's a secret weapon for hackathons. It's a secret weapon for hackathons. So my first, just eventing alone, just putting events down as to what's supposed to happen, but then with the screens, etc. Event modeling is a secret weapon to win a hackathon, because usually in a hackathon you kind of haphazardly grouped together. Maybe you're at some event, or maybe you're at school, and you're paired with people you don't know. How do you get on the same page to build something really quickly? Right? So if you take a half an hour or 15 minutes to quickly sketch out an event model and do this initial information completeness check to certain levels, and then after 15 minutes, people just grab whichever parts that they want to implement
in isolation.
There's no back and forth. And you look at a team in a hackathon that's done the event modeling for the first 10-15 minutes, versus the teams that just are left to their own devices.
Because they're still
Chaos.
designing the perfect system.
They're not even designed. Either they're doing that, or it's just a mess with people running around talking about why'd you do this? My implementation is this for this screen or whatever. It ends up being.
Or we're reusing this class or this model, and you used it differently than I did.
Yeah, there's no coordination. Like the amount of
hand
coordination and the communication mechanisms are very inefficient, or at least stressed to a point of people not knowing exactly where the handoffs are and things like that. So
I'm glad you mentioned Agile and DDD. Because in DDD event storming, that is generally about discovery, and Agile creating user stories, that's generally about refinement. And then Agile misses the part about discovery, and DDD generally misses the aspect of refinement. About, okay, but how do I get this down into code, into like a tactical space?
Yeah,
and you seem
both for us. Yeah,
and it seems it catches that bridge directly in the middle.
Yeah.
The raw refined version is exactly the purest form of the domain that is enough to solve the MVP, let's say.
Yeah, we don't do DDD and we don't do event storming, but we also do.
But you also do, yes.
But we also do. And what I mean by that is that we get the same end result. So our swim lanes in the event model are the bounded contexts that you have.
Yeah.
Our translation layers with the gears, with the read model and the view, the to-do list, and the command on the other side is the anti-corruption layer you're going to have on either side of that system. Beautiful. Integration between that. The event storming part is really like our brainstorming session about the events and organizing them into swim lanes.
Is this a difficult thing to learn? Like, because it's replacing an element of Agile, an element of project management. There's some team topologies going on in there in the background. There's some little bit of DDD. There's a little bit of TDD.
Yeah, definitely Conway's law. And all that. Yeah, for sure. And
like, is there a steep learning curve? Is there something non-linear about this?
Everything has a learning curve, but it's the shortest learning curve, and that's why it ended up being something that we did. I never actually wanted to make event modeling. Event modeling is the refinement of all of these different things I've been talking about.
In combination,
and trying to do them, as fast and as best as possible with high level of constraint and budget and time. Trying to lift my business off the ground, do all these things with high quality, and not spend a month in all these other practices, because I had a day. How do we do this in a day so that we save 29 days of this fixed cost, right? So it's been really the refinement of all these things. So the goals of let's just say that the goals of domain driven design is really to have a good ubiquitous language, to have some good bounded contexts where we don't get distractions with data that doesn't belong here and concepts that don't belong here, and that we have some team topologies so we can apply Conway's law across which subsystem is going to be looked at by which teams and how they're going to communicate more importantly. I can answer all those with event modeling. I don't need to do a lot of specific types of exercises for each aspect. I get the goals, each of those goals answered in an event model, and as it constructed, right? So
is event modeling adoption something a developer does, a team does, a leader does? Who is patient zero?
Depends on the organization. How I like to say it sometimes is, who cares the most about this project not failing? Usually it's the people holding the money.
Okay. And if they decide they want to do Agile,
but it could be anywhere. Like, we've seen people, there's problems with any adoption of anything, right? If it depends how involved in what their current, how a role is actually doing their current job. So one of the problems in adopting anything new, like event modeling, for example, has a problem if someone from the tech side is pushing for it and adopting it, and the business gets caught kind of like, well, what are you doing? I'm just giving you user stories and I'm doing this traditional stuff, and leave me alone. I'm not here to
I was about
collaborate
to
with
ask
you.
about that. Yeah.
I'm not gonna waste time to collaborate with you. So unengaged business people that say, I have a job that has this description, I write emails all day and they have these meetings, go away. I don't want to talk to a developer or talk to any other person
that
that I don't need to
granularity.
talk. Right. So it's any of these things are human problems, no matter what you're doing, DDD or
amazing,
whatever your approaches are, the problems are always with the humans.
So it addresses the entire vertical, like the entire business vertical of
it's a common
software.
understanding. It's about talking about a blueprint for the system that's understandable by business and all that. So the adoption is, the adoption can be bad from the business if those people are not willing to be there and they don't care. That might be in a large organization where I think someone did a really good LinkedIn post about the team size or company size where it's the half of the square root of the number of people is how you're going to have that quietly quitting thing where people just do a bad enough job not to get, just a good enough job to not get fired, but to get let go so they can go to another company, right? So they get laid off and they get their severance package and they can go and get a job somewhere else that pays higher. This quiet quitting. It's easier to do quiet quitting the larger the team because you have a lot of other distractions of other team members to do that, right? So adopting something new in a company that's larger that has this quiet quitting happening, you're going to have very bad time implementing any change for anything. I don't care what
they're defensive about it, right?
and whatever you're trying to do to improve the organization, that organization is not going to improve, or at least not have the likelihood to improve compared to a smaller one, simply because of the visibility of someone blowing smoke up your butt that they're, oh yes, we want to improve, and then their actions prove the exact opposite, that they've done nothing, right? And I've seen this many times as a consultant in many places where you go in, they want to do domain-driven design, they want to do some good architecture, they want to do some agile stuff, and then you get the nods of, yes, of course, great to have you here, Adam, can't wait to change all these things, and a month later no one's changed a thing that they're doing.
They go back to what
they don't go back, they don't even start to implement anything that's been set as like, okay,
it's
now
too hard, too much.
Oh, now you're gonna
conflict.
attend, you can see signs of this even with agile adoption. It's like, oh, we need a subject matter expert at these meetings. Like, oh no, I'm sorry, I have a much more important meeting with our partner and an important client, and there's excuse after excuse as to why they're not there. It's the same thing with event modeling or any other practice. It's just that you're gonna have these things. And so what I see in terms of adoption for any of these types of collaborative approaches that are actually bridging gaps on the business side, it's about people not willing to collaborate and give value to that. It depends on the organization. We have some really good clients where the CEO is actively involved and he actually cares about the UX and UI as well and loves design and all that. And that's awesome, right? And then there's the opposite. There's like where people are so disengaged, they're checked out from helping one another. And then there's the opposite. If someone brings in event modeling, but they're on the business side, and then the developers are the ones that are like, hey, what is
resistant
this?
to it? Yeah.
Well, not resistant, but there's a change. How do they look at that, right? They're usually saying like, oh, I don't want to communicate with you either, and there's always it depends which side is
the
coming,
relationship
they have their
isn't
own,
there.
Yeah, they have whenever you ask people to collaborate, you're going to get different things, but we all know that when humans collaborate, amazing things happen. And so having a good medium for collaboration is one of the key things. You can ask people to collaborate, but if you don't have a method to capture the output of that collaboration, it's not a high value. So event modeling captures the collaboration, but the output of that is a design, a blueprint for a house, so you can build a house together. And then after that blueprint is still used to make improvements to the house. And imagine owning a house and you wanted to add an extra bathroom in the house. You certainly would need a blueprint to know where all
the pipes are,
plumbing is, and
yeah,
where the electrical is, and all that, and where the supporting walls are, and what you can and can't do, what your constraints are because of the design. You're not going to start to poke holes in the wall to find out where they are. Well, that's what you probably would have to do if you didn't have a blueprint for your house. So this is the same thing with our information systems. You need a blueprint to know where the heck you are when you're doing things, right?
To redo the discovery process.
Yeah, I mean, the event modeling is a proper blueprint that's usable by the most roles in an organization, and it's been really helpful for finding bugs and all those kinds of things. I keep talking about, we don't have bugs that ever last more than 4 hours. Those types of things, because we can find quickly the cause of that. And of course, when you're doing an implementation that's event sourced, you have this breadcrumb trail of like exactly how you got to a particular piece of state on disk, actually, like in the state of the system, but you have the schematic also to walk that process. So even people on the business side that notice something's not quite right with something, they can go to the event model and say, look, I'm on this screen, I know I've done these things, but I expect this, and I'm getting this other behavior or this
inconsistent
wrong.
with
So when I go to talk to people about my problem with the system, I'm not going there just saying it doesn't work. It's what's your bug? Well, it doesn't work. That's the big problem with people. The system's broken. Like, give me some context, right? And this gives you the ability to give the greatest amount of context for any deficiency you might see or missing features that you might like. You can start to discuss them with clear knowledge as to what's, what the current system is doing, and measure the impact of the potential change, whether it's a bug fix, if it's a new feature. You can walk that dependency to really say, oh, this is not just a t-shirt size subjective pull it out of thin air kind of like, what do I feel the complexity is? I can say that this affects 5 steps. If I'm going to change this screen to have this different data or this different behavior, I know the impact of that change, and I can say that I'm going to have to address these other 3 or 4 state changes in state views, and therefore it's going to take them a week to implement. I'm giving something concrete back to the business about how much of an impact this is. It's change management done properly and done lightly without the red tape, right? People are scared of the word change management. It goes back to, fill out these forms to change the system, and that's why we get, old kind of large banking systems that seem to never really move forward
to adapt, innovate. Yeah,
but so change management is an evil word for a lot of people, right? It's a concept that goes back to like, this is really old school kind of stuff, but it's important. Change management, you have to manage the impact of what you're going to change in the system. Don't do it with red tape like the old days. Show it on this diagram exactly which parts are going to get, which pieces are going to get affected. If you're going to replace them, if they're no longer relevant, you account for exactly how much that's going to be. And these slices give you a good velocity, right? After you've done a lot of projects with event modeling, you get a really good empirical measurement of velocity for your teams, for your individuals, that you can use then without resorting to subjective things like silly t-shirt sizing that we use.
Over Fibonacci. So so you get more stuff done with less people. That's the main selling point. Like it cuts out the needless ceremony.
It has there's fewer moving pieces.
Process. There's fewer
moving pieces to manage. So I mean, I don't like to say that you're going to get more done with fewer people, because that means people are going to get fired. I like to say that the same people can do a lot more work. That's a more positive way of saying that, is that, that roadmap that we're constantly missing the goals on, we're actually going to fast forward that this year. Right? That's what we want to talk about. It's not about firing people or reducing the team size. It's about getting everyone to be highly effective.
And you're using the event model schema, the data relationships, the coupling relationships, the events themselves as a map of saying, last time I changed something in this part of the map, it took this much time because it's coupled to these systems. So there's a sort of locality to
Well, it's even more
sort of
specific than that, because it's not just saying because it's related to these things. It says that I have to change these things. It's good to know which it's related to, but do I need to affect that other part, right? If I add a date of birth to the registration process,
and whether it's in
where
lockstep
is that
or
date of
if it
birth
can be
going to
done
pop
later.
up? Do I have that popping up in my profile? Is that date of birth also used as a check for this other command, or maybe it's added as a filter for filtering out content that kids shouldn't see on this other screen? That's what I'm getting. I now know exactly which parts I'm going to change. So it's not just about walking the dependency, it's seeing the impact of those dependencies in that coupling.
It's a bit more clear to the person requesting the change.
Well, yeah, I mean, I use the in my latest presentation, I kind of use the Rick and Morty fun adventure analogy, where it's just a quick 20-minute adventure, right? And then 2 days later, they're all like beaten up, and like it wasn't a 20-minute adventure. They went down a rabbit hole, and you know how this happens in typical offices. This is the infamous Friday afternoon change when the boss swings by your desk and says, "Oh, can you just add this field here?" And you know the junior person goes, "Oh, sure, thank you, sure, boss. I'll want to make them happy." And that poor soul goes down a rabbit hole, and they're still working on Sunday, just ruined their weekend and everything, because you pull the thread on one end of the system and you start to blindly follow the fallout of the broken tests of the broken system, and now you're having to patch all of these different things. The proper thing to have said was, all right, boss, let's take a look at the event model together. And if I add this here, where else should I see it? And where does it go here? And you can start to walk. And then after a 5-minute conversation, the boss that came by sees that the one field they asked for is going to impact, 5 different places. And we know from our velocities that each of those changes is going to take 2 to 3 days each.
But that thing that I'm looking at, so
it's 2 weeks of work that you wanted me to do in an afternoon, right? So the boss should say, "Oh, you're right. Let's pick this up on Monday, and we can discuss how we can do this and plan for it together with the rest of the team."
That's thing you're looking at is a document. It is not actually part of a live operational artifact, right?
Yeah, no, it's
the event model. So
the event model is a document.
It sounds like it can be really huge.
Yeah, it can be.
So how do you manage the document itself? That sounds to be where most of the complexity would come from for a beginner who's going to adopt this. How do you? So is it like a giant Miro board, or is it like
it could be a Miro board. It could be a physical one if you're still working in an office altogether. But these days it's mostly digital because a lot of people are working from home. So yeah, it can get quite large. So you can organize it by larger workflows in rectangular areas, and some of the larger event models that we had. Just Miro tends to slow down. Like when you load up Miro and you can see that blue bar across the top, creaking across, like, oh my goodness, it's getting 2 minutes just to load this up, and the scrolling is slow. And so yeah, Canvas
is it a bottleneck?
Yeah, that's a bottleneck. So there's only so much a browser can handle in terms of Canvas manipulation. And there's other tools that are like Bobby Calderwood's ONote is one that doesn't specifically use a canvas. It's using divs and all that kind of stuff. And there's other tools that are coming out specifically for event modeling that don't require a canvas. They're using more native elements for the web page to hopefully scale this to much larger
doesn't render that much
sizes, and use React and other things to manipulate logically what's happening. But
Miro boards have enormous resolution.
Yeah, exactly. So you can show and hide parts of it. So you could theoretically really have everything on one blueprint, but the tooling that shows it is highly efficient to navigate it. at different levels of Zoom. And
Does it make
that's
sense to
fine.
somehow split it up into smaller problems, like to
Yeah,
chunk
we
up a
do, and
diagram?
that's yeah. If I mean, the fact is that most companies have adopted Miro for some sort of diagramming or collaboration, so it's easy to find that tool already in a lot of organizations, and
Hmm.
an event model can make
Perfect.
use of that. And so, yeah, once an event model gets, we've had event models that have 1,500 events,
I can
and
imagine. Yeah, and it's
yeah,
like
there've
a
been
lot of
some really
mouses
large projects,
moving
right?
around.
Well, now it's it's millions of dollars worth of projects are using event modeling, from giant companies to startups.
Hmm.
It's kind
Is
of taken
there
off on its own.
a precondition to the type of company, size of company, maturity of company? Is there
Not
anybody
really.
for whom event modeling is not a good fit for?
It's not. It fits 99% of the systems, because event modeling is built for line of business applications, which is 99% of the systems. It's yet
Hmm.
another inventory system. It's yet another insurance company. It's yet another fintech thing.
Hmm.
um, it's yet another app. So those, automating regular businesses is where it fits. Like if you're programming some brand new B tree optimization algorithm or something technical, it's highly unlikely you would use event modeling, although you could try.
Hmm.
I think what people miss when they have a highly scientific or R&D type of project, they miss the fact that they're going to have a lot of information management around that core domain that they're exploring and being scientific in. And those parts definitely are going to benefit from event modeling, so that you can treat your experiment as a something you charge time and materials for, and it's time boxed, and it's also this black box on the event model. It's a stream that may only capture events of the inputs and outputs of the magical thing you're creating. But for
Hmm.
99% of the systems out there, we're just shoveling information from left to right and doing some transformations on it from here to there, right? I mean, automate a point of sale system, automate Uber, automate any of these things. It's just moving information around. It's nothing revolutionary we're doing. It's the same thing over and over again. So this is kind of like event modeling gives you the building block of information systems, right, through the eyes of events.
But it sounds like event sourcing is a precondition, or at least an ideal approach to be using event modeling with.
It's that's where it started. I don't think so. I think we think in events naturally. So
Mhm.
I don't think it's
I
something
mean,
that
we
has to be
do.
there.
The context for my question is more about if I already, the ship has sailed. The pre-existing application, whatever the company is about, has already been set up in a traditional data model
Hmm.
sense. Can that process and current system be adapted naturally so it can evolve into a more event modeling approach and event sourced approach eventually? Is that process of adoption organic, or does it there, do we just throw it away and rewrite
No,
everything?
very, very much so. I mean, we're working on a project right now with a company that sells sheds across the U.S., and they have they have a B2B business, but they decided to expand into B2C, direct to consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And so we built the consumer e-commerce side, and it sits right alongside the traditional system they had before.
Mm-hmm.
And
In parallel, or
yeah,
is
and
it
you can
incorporated?
exactly, they sit there together, and the event model can show both and how they interact and when they
Mm-hmm.
interact. So yeah, it's really not about the implementation, it's about how you talk about what the system does. And having an event model does help you extend your system into, if
Mm-hmm.
you have a migration path technically to move to event driven architecture and event sourcing, and your new requirements would be much better off by having a history. You're not going to lose data. Then having an event model for it really helps you understand where those handoffs are to the old system,
Mm-hmm.
where you need to backfill information in the old system. You can point to those places. quite easily. And I think
What about
traditionally we kind of just look at the old systems as the only way to do it is kind of open up Michael Feather's book, Legacy Code, and start
yeah.
unit testing the abstractions. And my opinion about the abstractions are pretty worthless.
Yeah.
So focusing on state instead is much better.
I've seen a lot of companies do that, exactly that anti-pattern, or let's say that the sort of forced in anti-corruption layer, where they're doing some kind of ETL or CDC, not to an all-up database, but to a.
I should probably tell people what ETL and CDC is.
Oh, so it's yes. So we're talking about transforming data from one system to be used in a different way into another system. And usually this comes with problems of making sure that when you're importing a large data set, that you're not re-importing duplicate entries, or that you're managing that state capture. And CDC particularly is change data capture, where you're trying to create deltas based on snapshots. So if you're doing ETL and CDC as an anti-corruption layer of saying, well, here's this system, it's a black box, but it has snapshots. I'm going to reverse engineer. I've seen a lot of people reverse engineer CDC from those systems and treat them as events for an event sourced new parallel version of the system. And it sounds like that is like playing with fire. That kind of anti-corruption layer.
No, it's not that bad. I think it's a lot better. CDC is a lot better than having your developers spelunk in the code they don't understand. Right?
Fair enough.
They're with their flashlights looking at what the heck this 5,000 line method is doing. I think that's a very low fidelity way of doing things and very rife with risk and time consuming and so frustrating.
That is your preferred risk of just doing CDC and
absolutely. If you
adopting it.
Yeah, with legacy stuff, most of the time you're better off to let go of any ideas of abstraction in the code and let the data speak for itself.
Data speak for itself.
Something
that's
you
beautiful.
have way more, you have way more confidence in to move forward. And it's an idea that it sounds like it's irresponsible or taking a shortcut, but it's actually if it ain't broke, don't fix it attitude, and starting to put in sidecars for new functionality, etc. You want to minimize risk and you want to make the most of people's time, etc. So those are open close principles, something that you kind of want to force upon some things, because you don't want to continue to have change. One of the problems with undocumented large code bases that people don't know what they're doing is it's walking on eggshells to put changes in them. And if you touch some code, you have no idea how many side effects that has and unintended consequences, and is there triggers and stored procedures at work underneath, etc. But so it's very dangerous to do that. It's a lot easier to go in and adjust the data if there's an issue. If the old system has a bug, it's better to have a compensating action that might be a cron job that just corrects that mistake, every minute or every.
It's a very pragmatic approach.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, it's a compromise of what you're going to do, and I think it's the number of people that say this, go in there and pay back technical debt. Technical debt is a scam. It's such a bad idea, and I can't stand people talking about technical debt. It's one of the stupidest things we've done in this industry, is adopt this, we got to pay down technical debt. It's a round and round we go money making thing for middle management, consultants, etc. Like, no, like don't pay back technical debt.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. If you remove the amount of reuse you have of code, and you understand your state, you're not going to have to swim in garbage to pay back technical debt.
Because you make use of it.
Well, it's also a haphazard attempt. You try and put in your better abstraction, and then
You got it wrong already a few times.
Well,
there's no
yeah,
guarantee that
but
you
even
won't.
like if you're the one that's doing good work, there's going to be the others that don't give a crap about what you're doing, and they're going to fix a bug, and they're just going to revert your changes before you adequately fix the bug. And all the code that you did to fix technical debt is now garbage, because now you got to incorporate, you got to rebase all your changes on top of that new bug fix. And guess what? Every single commit you have is a giant friggin' conflict resolution.
Sounds like you did this before, not like
Yeah,
a large
I've
legacy
done this
system.
before. This is not my first rodeo, and I don't bind that garbage anymore. So yeah, not gonna happen.
So that's the context. Just for viewers who are perhaps unfamiliar with this. So that is the context of rewriting a legacy system to sort of try to
maintaining one, bringing one back
to maintaining it
to life,
while
like modernizing a legacy system, right? Like
modernizing
we have this old
exactly.
thing, right? And we have this new team. We have the company maybe bought another company. It was an acquisition.
So
and
you're modernizing while also adding new features.
Yeah,
and then it's always there's always a bunch of conflict happening with synchronization code.
Kids finding a new toy. It's just a waste. Yeah.
So is that how is on the context of, I do not expect event modeling to be this this high up in the sort of the whole life cycle of the project. Because when I just naively look at event modeling, I'm assuming it has something to do with event-driven architecture. You know, that event modeling is this concept of there will be this message broker and that event bus, and they communicate somehow with each other. You know, just from the name. Who does event modeling branding? You know, your Twitter and your LinkedIn handle is event modeling, Adam.
So
who's doing?
There's some people that are putting themselves as event modelers, which is cool. So I like that people.
So how can we help to spread the word to get it right? You know, what's important for you as the, let's say, pioneer and of event modeling? What's important for you to get it right? That this is an organizational concept. That this is a
it's a way of thinking. I think it's a change. It's a change in the way we think about systems. It's really going back to our natural roots of how we best collaborate and talk about systems. It's what we would have done before computing.
Like brick and mortar.
It doesn't need to be an event-driven system that's being described. It's about having a way of discussing, you know, if you're doing a traditional system and you're doing event modeling, your events are just things in your head, like I said before. But it's good to note them down, that, you know, this information exists somewhere. If your green boxes are simply different queries to a canonical giant model, that's fine. At least the event model will show you the high amount of coupling throughout your system. You're going to have way more slices related to one another, so that when you say, oh, we need to change a part of the system, and you have a single model implementation, you're going to see that, oh, that's going to add 2 months of work, right? Instead, if you're doing an event source system for the same problem and you have multiple models, the green boxes are actually islands of their own information. You know, that's going to have an impact and change. It's going to only take a week. And those are the differences we see. So event modeling applied to any type of implementation it's just a notation. It'll tell you what your coupling is. It'll allow you to design to show how you're using your data, where and when, specifically when, because that's the piece out of the whole, everyone loving APIs, and APIs are the best, and REST this and whatever. They all are missing the time context,
because they're abstracting the transport layer.
Specify when that is done, or with specifically what information and why that API call is being made. So I love the whole thing. We need to have good APIs. So what? How do I know it's good? I have no context for why you say this is a good API.
So for somebody who got inspired right now, but they're a bit on the fence, like something, maybe there's an element to event modeling that they're missing. Maybe, you know, you mentioned green boxes, blue boxes. I'm assuming those are the read projections and the state changes, the right models. there's a lot of phrases being thrown around. There's the more CQRS oriented command handlers, and then there's I saw you and Von Vernon had this discussion about, is the state that the command handler is using, is that part of the green box, or is that part of the blue box, or is that is that event sourcing without projections, or is it mandatory to use CQRS? Where should somebody who's a little bit on the fence, or perhaps just a little bit confused, go to get a little bit more clarity?
Yeah, so the thing that kicked this off was really going to the Event Storming Summit in 2018, where I didn't know I was doing event modeling. It was about doing all these other practices together. And one of the things that I said I was doing was event storming, and I wasn't. And I didn't find that out until I went to this summit that Alberto Brandolini invited me to back then. Great guy, amazing person that really got the workshop format going for these collaborations, and excellent contribution to the industry. But going to that summit, I said, you guys are doing event storming wrong. Here I am telling this to Alberto, right? And this is how you do it, right? The audacity of me saying that, but it was getting the answer that we weren't doing event storming, we're doing something else. So then I had to say, all right, this is something else. Let's pick a name. So we're not really, we're doing way more than just brainstorming and doing this collaboration one day. We're keeping these artifacts. So we're doing we don't have all these other pieces that event storming has. We don't have policies. We have a very rigid structure for how we move through. You talk about state of the system. So there's a lot of big differences there. So it's definitely event something, but what we're doing is actually modeling a system here. And so that's where event modeling came into being. And so in 2018, the tail end of 2018, I ended up writing, I think it was a Medium post on just the 7 steps of how you do event modeling, how you start with the brainstorming piece, and the timeline, and you get the wireframes in there to make sure that people see what's going on the screens as these events are happening. And then you organize, apply, Conway's law to organize your events into different subsystems, so that you understand how they interact with one another and when. Add the swim lanes for the different actors that are looking at the different screens. So there's a 7-step process, right? And doing the given when-thens with events is easier too. We didn't touch on the testing. Testing is incredibly easy once you have an event model, and talking about how you're going to test the correctness of the system. So all of these things were in the article as the 7 steps. And by the end of October, I think someone posted it to Hacker News Y Combinator, and it ended up being as the top article, at least for that day or the end of the month, or I forget what it was. But I started getting a lot of emails and people pinging me on Twitter from out of the blue. I'm like, I didn't know what was going on, and then someone sent me a link. Look at this, your article's taking off. So that was kind of a nice thing. And I said, oh, this is obviously bigger than I imagined. A lot of people were searching for the same answers to their problems as it's
intuitive. It's very natural.
Exactly. And so it was very intuitive for a lot of people, easy to pick up for a lot of people after they read that article.
But there's no book. No,
it's coming.
It's coming. Okay.
It's been. I said in 2019 that I would write the book, but since 2019 we've had the COVID, we have a recession, we have a whole business to run and a whole bunch of things. So it's on its way. But there will be a book because people want it. Although I don't want event modeling to be something that people equate with, I need to read the book to start doing it. That's why I was actually hesitant to put the book out.
That's the dogmatic approach.
Event modeling should be something you can explain in 15 minutes. You should be able to get going for an afternoon of event modeling. People that have never seen event modeling before should be brought up to speed in 15 minutes, and then actually learn it as they go for the afternoon, and be really happy at the end of that session that they got all their ideas out and communicated with everyone. And not only that, but they collaborated to refine those ideas together to make sure things make sense. So anyway, back to the story. this did take off quite a bit, and I said, well, I should probably just make a website for it and related articles. So there's about 4 or 5 articles on there that kind of talk about how you do event modeling for different things like legacy applications, or someone wrote things about how it's really about human communication and these natural things. So I added a few contributors articles on there too, but the main article from 2018 is the first one that's on there, and that's where I would say, read that article. It's a 7-minute read. That's all you should really need to do to understand the gist of it and actually start to apply it. The book will be there for tons of examples and really to give you a back, the whole background that some people require and need. They want a book to read. That's coming. That'll be there. But the best learning is to just do it and
just do it
and collaborate with others, and together you will understand it better. It is a collaborative approach. I also have a YouTube channel too, which you can link in notes if you want.
Absolutely.
So Googling event modeling is going to definitely come up with a lot of content for you. So I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, since we're broadcasting on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. And I have a Twitter account where I tend to post my controversial things there and discuss stuff there.
You're very active, very active. I love your Twitter. Yeah,
that's a big communication mechanism for me, and I think it's what Twitter was for me initially. I joined 13 years ago, in 2008 or 2007, I forget when. But anyway, when I joined there was a lot of technical talks on Twitter. It was really good. So I'm still active, quite active on Twitter. You can find my posts there. There is an event modeling Twitter account as well, where you'll only get the relevant tweets there, and you won't get my other ramblings in that account. So
what about the whole package? So event modeling, including event sourcing, including CQRS, including, so if you're not just doing event modeling from like a organizational perspective, but actually going to the core and just biting the bullet and doing everything, greenfield, brownfield properly with like the full tech stack.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred approach to CQRS and event sourcing?
I don't prefer,
first time.
Unfortunately, for some of our people that support us, like the framework folks, I don't buy into frameworks. I think we need to be in those approaches for event sourcing, etc. It's just a way of thinking about information. It doesn't require,
because that's one of the most common questions I get is like, what framework should I use for event sourcing, for projections, for writing
use
buses?
The right tools for the job. So the only hard recommendation that I have is use Event Store for storing events, because it's going to give you Event Store. That's Greg's project from back in 2014. The whole company.
And why do you recommend it? And why do you recommend it?
Well, there's some things about temporal data as you're going to ledger. There's some guarantees that you want that even high throughput things like DynamoDB don't do as well.
Ordering and write once and guarantees.
Ordering. So the two things is make sure that your events are durable. There's a lot of implementations out there, and the Kafka people are guilty of publishing things before storing those events. So if the system does go down, you end up with subscribers that can't trace back as to why they got into a certain state or how come that event was received here.
So you don't have a clear replay.
Yeah, exactly. So the guarantee is that the event is durable, and that whenever and that you have global ordering for those events, at least for that instance or that cluster.
Yeah, within some partition.
That gives you that mathematical integrity for the system you're writing.
I am here, and it will always be true that I am here.
Yeah, every time that I look at this information, I'm always going to get the same projection, and that level of guarantee allows you to not have to implement a ton of other safety measures that you get with distributed systems.
And that is the hardest.
If you're going to eventual consistency, right? If you're writing a small system, heck, I just write the event straight to disk. You don't need anything. Like if you're writing a trivial system, it would be just fine to just start writing events right onto disk and use your system.io libraries that come with your language to manipulate it. You'll probably learn more about event sourcing that way anyway.
Just keep it simple.
keep it very simple, and
Yeah.
then
So
you can move those events obviously over to something more mature as your
Mhm.
solution scales. And that's the beautiful thing about event sourcing, is that no matter what, you can take your events and re-implement the whole thing in a whole new architecture, etc., and it'll do
and
the
just
exact
replay
same
it
thing.
differently, and it'll still work the same way.
It'll exactly, you can start using different abstractions,
Fair.
etc., and it'll still
Mhm.
work. So but yeah, if
It's a very good point,
highly,
because you're
if
schema independent from the
yeah,
underlying
exactly,
databases
and
as well.
exactly. And what I would really recommend is, if you're doing a brand new project, and you're maybe even a hobby project at home, and you want to
Mhm.
try this out, don't just start coding. Do an event model first. It's literally a paper
Mhm.
napkin exercise that takes 5 minutes, but it's amazing when you put down on paper in front of you what you want to have, versus just opening up a blank HTML source page and start putting divs in, and then starting to put in some objects and methods and start writing that. You get way too far in the weeds too quick. You get really distracted by detail. Maybe some people do it, but most people, you need to have that top down, like, what is it that I'm going to be writing? And an event model is a really friendly way to get that done quickly. And it came, like, a lot of event modeling came from the paper napkin approach, because a lot of the concepts I was
The
talking
whiteboarding.
about
Yeah.
well, a lot of the
It's like, I
concepts
have
in
this
event
data
sourcing
here,
and
and it'll move here.
a lot of the concepts in event sourcing and CQRS were in paper napkin conversations with Greg Young, right? We sat there at a bar with a lot of times, Greg would say to the waitress, can you get me a napkin and a pen? And that was like one of the things that we used to do all the time while we
Beautiful.
drank beer and argued about tech and talked about these things. So you should do the same thing for yourself, and just grab a piece of paper and a notepad and sketch out the wireframes, but then note down what information it's storing. Events are a very simple way to do that. You're not going to be drawing, grids for tables. Keeping it simple like that is going to allow you
No ER diagram, no
none of that. You're
nonsense.
actually going to say, oh, cool. After like 5 minutes of drawing this, you actually get inspired to do that. But not only that, then that small little, sketched out little event modeling diagram that you have there is going to give you guidance for actually learning event sourcing. So you're going to say, okay, what do I do now? Oh, I store an event. Oh, what do I do here? Oh, I have to make sure that these things subscribe to these events so I can make this screen look like this.
Because you need
And you can follow the
invariants and
arrows
checks.
nice and naturally, and then you're like, oh wow, I actually got my project, right? It's kind of what I mentioned with the hackathon, but it works for yourself as well, just being able to
it's that
break things
approach.
down. It does allow you to also then really time yourself. You don't have to resort to a Pomodoro technique or anything. You can say that, oh, even for my little silly side project to try out event sourcing, I know that each of these screens that I'm doing, it's taking me, half an hour or 2 hours of my evening. So I can actually plan for my silly little project that, after work or on my weekends, I'm going to spend this amount of time working on my project. And I can now say that, hey, my project's ready to test. I have some little open source thing that I want to share with everyone. I know that I can make some plans around it too. So yeah.
So it's possible in a monolith, in a synchronous system, in a CRUD system.
Yeah, it has no opinion on your implementation.
Okay. And
but
CQRS
it's really helpful if you're trying something new.
It's optimal,
especially
it's
if you're
ideal.
If you're trying to do event sourcing, and you've never done it before, an event model is going to help you a lot.
I see. So it goes hand in hand as well.
You don't know where things are going or why they're there, etc. Right? So having this reference point for this keeps you organized so that you can give it a fair shake, and understand what you're doing. Because event sourcing is really just a different way. You can have an event source, a non-event source side by side doing exactly the same thing, right? And you can kind of look at, what are the mechanisms that work in one versus another. Oh, here I have, less coupling. Cool, I can actually see that each of these screens isn't coupled to the other ones. I'm repeating information here. That means I can work independently on this screen. Whereas in the traditional system, when I'm working on this screen, I'm looking at this relational model, and if I change some information in this table, I also have to now worry about an extra few pieces here, and those extra few pieces are kind of like the yeah, that really unhealthy hockey stick curve of traditional systems they
Yeah.
talk about. How you have death marches. Every traditional system is inevitably going to be a death march because of the single model approach, and the coupling is just going to destroy you. It's not something you can find a way out of, and so you have pizza-sized teams, and you have all sorts of ways to break things up early on because of the extra amount of coupling, right? So with a multiple model approach, which event sourcing does give you, it does imply CQRS, even though you don't have to physically, like I said, separate these sides, at least logically they are. And if you do event sourcing by bare bones and you're using the file system, don't even have the green boxes as implementations, use a functional approach, grep through those, filter through those events you have on disk to find the information you need and do the manipulation you need to display the information on that screen. And you'll notice you're writing the same thing you would have in your update statements or other things. You're doing the same work.
And then you can cache that, use that as a projection.
Yeah, exactly. So like the green boxes on the read side are really like active caches that are materialized. They're materialized calculations that you would do from a functional perspective on
it's very simple
raw data. Exactly, it is. And there's more stuff coming for event sourcing from us specifically because we've spent a lot of time on event modeling. But we do at my company we do event sourcing only. Like we only do event sourcing implementation.
That's your niche. That's what AdapTech does.
Well, it's not. It shouldn't be a niche. I think it should be the default for all systems. I don't think we should be.
You're very passionate about that.
We shouldn't be throwing information out by default. Event sourcing is the default that should be in all systems. By saying that you have an update or delete statement possible in your system means you're throwing information away. And people say that CRUD is the best default, are saying that wasting information is a good default, which is an accountant. You wouldn't last a day as an accountant or in fintech or any other non-trivial systems. So our default should always be event sourcing.
So that's really powerful. That's a good message. So that covers CQRS. Is there any big project reference that you want to shout out that you successfully used event modeling, CQRS, event sourcing on?
Well,
you want to name?
There's hundreds.
Do you want to name a good example for reference? Perhaps one that is available for people to look at or to analyze.
Well, that's the problem. Is all our projects are private IP, right? They're all internal projects. They hire us to do this, and then they get a system that houses their IP. So I can't just open source someone's code from their company. Probably would be in jail by now.
So they'll have to wait for the book for the examples.
No, there's we do have some plans to open source our JavaScript stack with Node.js. And the reason I wanted that is because it's more of a collection of libraries rather than the framework. It's about, I can plug
approaches.
I can plug in SQLite for event store here, or I can use event store here. I can use Postgres or something else here for our projections. I can mix and match. Here's where a command handler lives. Here's where an event handler lives or a read model lives. I can not have any of those things. I can have a serverless implementation where I have those command handlers and event handlers all living as lambdas somewhere. That's fine. That's I want it to be a collection. Here's something that works, but it's a kit, and you can replace those things. I don't want a framework. I mean, we work mostly on this as a set of templates, really. So when we have a new project, we copy paste the entire previous project we did because the infrastructure is the same. We change the events, we change the screens, and within days we got a new system that works properly, has all the architectural pillars you need for scaling upward, sideways, or whichever way you want. And that cadence is really important. I mean, we didn't even scratch the surface of that. Like working in event sourcing with event modeling is the holy grail so far in terms of being able to be able to predictably work and of course being able to offer this for fixed costs and have bug fixes that are free. Those are things that I wouldn't dream of doing without event modeling and event sourcing. You know,
because in a large system that doesn't have
well, there's a
this,
cadence. With the fact
every
that
step
we
is more
have
expensive.
these, well, it's not about whether it's a large system or not. We're working on large systems too. It's about the fact that you've itemized state changes and state views so that you have this cadence, and you can say that each step costs X amount of dollars to make, and that, you know, our consultants also give that guarantee to me. So if there's a bug in their code, they fix it for free, and it's the right carrots and sticks that you get. Because if someone goes really fast and implements 10 slices, but they do it haphazardly, well, they're going to spend the rest of the month fixing bugs. So they didn't really get ahead anywhere, right? So there's this natural incentive to produce high quality code, because you never want to go back and fix your bugs, because you want to work on the next slice to earn more money. So it's a natural way. So we don't really have any salaries aside for, you know, 2 core people that are CTO and one other you know, higher up person technically. So that doesn't make any more management work for me. Like, doing event sourcing and event modeling allows me to run my business as a flat organization with no management structure at all, and have self-organizing teams that have very little overhead. And they feel quite empowered to do that, as we can very easily adjust the team sizes. Since there's no pizza size restriction, we have a design.
Exactly.
So the number of concurrent people that can work on the project is a lot higher. That gives us the flexibility to, you know, add way more folks to keep things moving without suffering the typical problems that you have that coupling introduces, and lack of planning introduces, where you have a lot of rework done. You know, add typical agile stuff with no designs done. You have, you know, 80% of the work is rework, whereas we have very little to none of it. It's each of these slices follows open close principle. Once it's done, it's done. It doesn't get looked at again. And if it ever has a failure or any concerns, or has to be changed, it's actually thrown out and replaced entirely.
And by the sound of it, following the open close principle, every artifact you produce is either a downstream dependency or something very valuable in on itself. Because you always take one step, which is either I'm going to produce a green box and it's going to be useful to somebody, or I'm going to produce a dependency that will allow us to connect to that other subsystem.
Yeah, so a lot of the dependencies to other, especially external systems, are, you know, it's not all fixed cost. There's some time and materials that's done for integrations, etc. But they're an OC complexity, because once you make an integration to a payment service, then you're reusing that payment service integration in multiple places on your workflows, and so it doesn't really have you know, the same kind of cadence. But, you know, 90% of our budgets are always, you know, this fixed cost way of analyzing a solution, so that there's no runaway budgets, there's no 95% done yet there's nothing to show, right? Everything is demonstrated. That
invisibility problem of agile projects.
You know, in terms of testing and showing done is done, event modeling is really good for that, especially with event sourcing. So I can say that the middle part of the solution we're going to implement, and I can put in fake events for the previous slices
to show something
didn't build yet, and then just run the solution from that point on. And it's as if we had the previous things already done, and their artifacts are evident in the event store. So everything for the part that we did implement is demonstratable. You can use it right away. So in terms of having MVPs, etc., it's where your MVP is part of the real solution. If you don't have any potential changes from feedback, you get to keep it all, which is not the way companies work. It's usually an MVP means you did such a shit job that you got to throw it all out and start from scratch. That's a horrible.
Or to have like a really complex fixture. That is very, you know, expensive to replicate, and then you do that rather than working on the project.
But from a perspective of I don't know, like, why is my thing out of focus?
Just the autofocus.
I hate this camera. I gotta replace it. It's got this weird out of focus thing. But anyway, yeah. But for testers, if you're still doing testing, whatever, I'll be blurry for the last part.
That's okay.
Oh, there we go. It worked.
Yeah.
For testing, for people that need to do like actual QA tests and need to drop in at a particular screen in the sequence to do something, the setup behind the scenes through events is a lot easier to do, to get the system into a state where you can pick up off of a specific screen and do that.
Because you have given when then natural gherkin style access to every slice of the production system.
If you look at the event model, you can dive in and say these parts aren't implemented yet, right? These parts aren't implemented yet, but we're now, so we need to pretend like we've done them, put the events in to the system, and then we can pop up to the UI at this point and start testing, because that's a real system now. But we were able to set up our test scenarios in a much easier way than with what current tooling does. So even in unit tests, and we don't have integration tests, by the way. Well, we do, but we unit test evidence of integration, which is another way of removing a lot of the tooling. So yeah, the testing pyramid for just to divert to unit testing, we have the traditional pyramid is you should have a lot of unit tests and then some integration tests and the very, very few end-to-end tests at the top, right? The pyramid is very tiny at the top because those things take a long time to run.
They're expensive to set up.
Expensive, exactly, right? So we want unit tests.
And slow.
Those things are also going to point out where things are failing, and you can find the bugs.
And they're much more subjective. They might be testing style as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we don't have any end-to-end and unit tests in terms of the way they're structured. We have what's called a testing square. We actually have a lot of integration tests and a lot of quote unquote end-to-end tests. And the reason we can have a lot of them is because they run extremely fast and they're incredibly easy to set up. And it's part of the event sourcing way of working that you can make a projection to have an opinion about a long-running set of workflows that is just testing whether that projection is correct. So it's a form of subcutaneous testing that does 90% of what you would do in an end-to-end test. And we simply found that the diminishing returns don't justify having a full end-to-end test through UI automation or any of those things. And so any kind of integration tests that we have are facilitated by projections or views or read models that listen to events over a long long path through the system. That's going to give you the same result. So you can have what are essentially integration tests implemented in the style and speed of unit tests, and we've been able to do that because of event sourcing. Just understanding that information at this fundamental level allowed us to make these leaps forward, where you can certainly take a different approach and weigh the pros and cons of what you're going to focus on.
And the read models are also simpler, right? Because is it fair to say that then you have a natural tendency to create something representing almost like a GraphQL system that grows organically, because you're catering projection models to the particular use cases?
They're highly independent, so there's no risk for me to add another
and they don't have that
model. I'm reading the same source of truth, and so I'm just making a projection that suits me for this new screen I'm going to do. I'm not asking someone else that made another screen before whether I can change this table or their projection. I'm not.
The projections can be trees. It can be like very complex data.
It could be a totally different technology. It doesn't have to be a table in a database. It could be it could be
you don't have the grid problem of having one table and then requiring joins and then there being asymmetric relationships.
No, they're highly decoupled. Like they're not coupled at all to anything else except the source of truth. The only handshake we have that we all agree on is that the event stream is the source of truth, and I'm not going to rely on anything else other than that, because if you rely on what I did for this screen, A, I might have gotten it wrong, B, I might change it later, and that's going to impact
and then the database might have some invariants with foreign keys, with unique constraints.
But it's really keeping it at the human level. If you worked on screen A and I'm working on screen B, and I think it's a good idea for me to reuse your projection, The minute you change something because you actually weren't finished, you're
Break stuff for
adversely
me.
affecting what I did. That's
Yeah.
like that we're coupled now.
So you're
what
so
I
you
would
get
do
that.
is I would copy yours. Say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna steal your work and then I'm gonna just adjust it. And that's what we encourage. All of our solutions
Steal your
are
work.
are copy pasting.
So steal the projector, not the data model.
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially, if you committed your work for your page, and in there was a projection that created a table that looked awesome. I'm like, okay, cool. You've done a lot of work for me. I'm doing this next page here that does some other stuff, but I see that like you got 90% of the code, like the information that I need. So I'm just going to copy yours and adjust it a little bit to make it work with mine. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I don't want reuse.
So
the reuse is
that's
coupling.
solving that Conway's law
The dry
issue.
principle is led the industry down that whole
wrong
canonical
path.
model, monolith style. So dry principle should just not even be mentioned anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
You'll naturally find reuse for things you did, utility classes and other things here and there, but it's not something that you do for
your domain model.
Workflow steps. Workflow steps tend to drift apart based on the flexibility that we need for adjustments, and the minute
the business is changing, like you said at the beginning.
Exactly.
You want
so
the business
different parts
to change.
of that, different parts of that workflow may be different. Now that the minute if I reused yours and there was changes coming in, then it would take both of us to coordinate. It's already a heavy process now because we're coupled, right?
Because there's handoffs, handbacks,
as opposed to now,
meetings.
the scenario where I copied yours and there's a change that affects yours or mine, we don't have to bother each other. We just make those changes and understand that it's not going to have any fallout. Now you do have to trace the data, like maybe there is something embedded in data. There's no easy way out of the fact that we're coupled, we're reusing information as it's going through the system. Yeah, if all of a sudden you have a different encoding for something at the very beginning, it may precipitate to a lot of things. Some of those dependencies, there's nothing that's going to get you out of that problem. That's the nature of the information system itself. But I think the industry has introduced a ton of additional coupling on good intentions. That road to hell is paved with not repeating yourself. And so that's something that's bad. But in terms of what it means day to day for someone working with a system like this, is a wonderful way of, like, onboarding is incredibly cheap because you should be able to, if you're experienced, you should be pushing to production within an hour.
Yeah,
I simply copied what you did in your projection, adjusted it. I might have even copied some of the code for your page because you have some patterns there that are useful to me. And if I'm done in half an hour with my unit tests as well, to make sure that the projection is showing the information like I want through what I can see on the event model as potential permutations of data that might be there, and then pushing within that hour. That's my onboarding. It's copy pasting from not from Stack Overflow. It's copy pasting from the existing solution. That gives you cadence, that gives you predictability. That means not every single requirement is a brand new puzzle that's solved differently.
It has to be understood separately by each developer.
Find that developer because I don't know what the hell this is. If I don't know what a slice does and I have to change it, I just delete it and re-implement. It should be, again, a very short process, right? And you get really good at that. And maybe that people that are new to programming, it might take them a week or two to do one slice as they're learning. But the people that are really fast, they'll go really quick. And we've had, one of the big eye openers here when doing this by fixed cost is just how much disparity there is in pay for the different levels of developers that are there. So, people are saying, oh, I didn't get my 10% increase, or why is that person getting paid, $10,000 more than me? I've had better experience, whatever. The minute that we removed that and just went with fixed costs, I saw that the discrepancy is anywhere from $5,000 to $60,000 per month. I'm not kidding you. Some people are so good that if you pay them on fixed costs and you force them to guarantee that it's going to work and it is bug free, they will still end up making more money than lawyers. If you're a good programmer, find a place where you can work on fixed costs based on slices, and you will make more than lawyers and doctors if you're really good. That's one of the things that's awesome. So you can find the 100x, the 10x, the 1x people. They all have a place, and some people.
And do you have a marketplace? Like, is this AdapTech specific? Is this event modeling specific?
No, that's how we run our company. But it's event modeling and event sourcing that allows us to work on this fine-grained level for fixed costs, so that we're not paying for a fixed cost project is $500,000 all or nothing. It's like, okay, it's $500,000, but here's why. We have these small steps, and each one is worth this much money. And these people are going to be working on it, and I'm going to be paying them for doing that work. So it allows us to do that. It's what we were able to do to improve our business, but we couldn't have done that without having a really good handle on requirements, coupling, all these things that are problems with software development. We needed to have a solution to all those problems in order to do that. Now there are other problems we still face, but we've reduced 90% of what plagues other software projects.
So you got it down to rather than doing, is this a 1, is this a 2, is this a 3, is this an 8 in story points, you picked one size, and you picked a methodology that allows all problems to be solved incrementally with this one size.
That's right.
And then you do this one size.
Yeah, I like to say that, yes, every system is different. Every system is like a snowflake. But what we found is the
ideal atomic unit.
Is the water molecule. We found the water molecule. Right.
Beautiful.
And so now, yes, every system that we develop is not the same thing over and over again, but the steps are.
The steps, the increment size
makes it incredibly predictable. It makes it boring, predictable, but boring, predictable means no bugs. It means estimates.
Boring and predictable.
All of these things, right? When you put down a brick on a wall and you put down the next brick on a wall, you can measure with high certainty how long it'll take you to build that wall because you're using the same size brick.
I see.
And it's not, this is an extreme view, but for the most part, it does average out to that. So if you analyze the system by state changes, then you will have a good idea of what it is.
So for anybody who we just inspired, either by the talk or by boring and consistent, if we inspired
any business, the exciting stuff, solving the problem is the exciting part. Writing a for,
but you don't want that affecting pay and risk.
If you want to play with algorithms and do another for loop or whatever, fine. Do that in a pet project, but like you want to
there's coding katas for that.
Yeah, you want to have a predictable way to solve a larger business goal, a business problem. And you want to do that as fast as possible with the highest quality as possible. Squeeze that iron triangle as tight as possible so that you can deliver the most value for your clients, your customers, your company.
So if we inspired any developers who would like to work for you, is there a place that they can go to reach out to you?
Yeah, they can obviously, if you go to eventmodeling.org, there's a Slack channel there that we have for communications generally around.
It will be in the description.
Yeah, you can leave. I mean, if you search for event modeling, go to the resources page on the eventmodeling.org site. There is a link for the Slack channel, which you can do. But obviously, Twitter is a great place to communicate since I'm on there quite a bit, and LinkedIn as well. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit
for questions, anything,
questions like that. And then of course, as I publish any kind of talks or run our meetup, which I'm bringing back to be at least every second week.
It's an online workshop.
That's right? Well, there are workshops as well. You can take workshops. I'm doing one next week with Vaughn That's part of Von Vernon's series. So that's next week. If you might be able to find the spot still if you want to join the 2-day workshop to do event modeling and event sourcing with me. That's next week. But then we'll also have our own that's scheduled for end of November too. And hopefully a slim chance that we'll be in Europe in beginning of December. So we'll see. Keep your if we get to
which part of Europe?
Munich. So
Munich.
We'll probably be in Munich at the beginning of December. The timeline's tight. We've had a lot of stuff. I had my son had an operation and I had to take care of him and all this. So there's a lot of things that were kind of tripping me up to get this the schedule in line for fall. A lot of non-business related life things that happened. So but my goal is still to have something in person in Munich, if possible, at the beginning of December. So if you're in the general vicinity,
I might see you there. I am.
Well, there you go. So that would be really good. And reach out to me if you want to talk on these subjects too, because we want to invite other people. So if you want to talk about something that you find interesting, send me some talk proposals. I'll put in an agenda that probably will get a big enough group for us to afford to go and fly over there and visit everyone in person. So that's the goal. So there's a lot of our meetups are on the YouTube channel. You can easily find a lot of content here. A lot of the meetups that we did record on that YouTube channel is active kind of event modeling, talking about these things. So I do have a small little project that I also do for either a to-do list or time tracking application. You're asking about example projects. So we kind of work through them with people at that meetup to show how this is done in real life.
It's like an architecture kata.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
a life system.
Yeah, and it's nice as well if you're working for a company that's in logistics or fintech. It's just a matter of time before you're doing something like this, so you can prepare yourself.
Event modeling, event sourcing, CQRS.
It's on.
It's a very natural. Yeah.
Well, Vaughn did a really good post. We mentioned one of his posts earlier, but Vaughn had a really nice post about the fact that event sourcing on the Gartner adoption group is this curve that they have. This Gartner group has this adoption curve, and the initial spike up in popularity is always talked about as the hype cycle, and then there's the depression, the dip of depression or whatever, the trough of depression, after everyone gets disillusioned with the hype and the over promises and the bad implementations and the bad takes on it. Everyone drops it and it's just like it goes down. But then the gems from those approaches, the people that stuck to it, stick around.
The refinements,
the refinements,
maturity,
and so that slow curve up is the slope of enlightenment, right? Vaughn said event sourcing is now in this enlightenment phase of rising popularity, where you're doing it responsibly and you have a lot of people that were dedicated to it, and we're well past 10 years of adoption now. So we're quite, with the concept itself, in terms of companies that have been around, we're 7 years of only doing this. So there'll be more and more companies that are only doing event sourcing like us. But I think we're in the lead for doing event sourcing and event modeling
right now
together. So if you want to be on that part of that enlightenment phase with event sourcing and event modeling, or just event modeling, join us, learn through those recorded meetups, join us for real meetups, come to a whole workshop if you can afford it and have the time, or your company has a budget for education. They're not expensive. I'm trying to keep them reasonably priced. And I think, for this year, I think we're approaching almost 1,000 people that have taken the workshops, which is,
wow.
I couldn't believe it. Just how much adoption there is. And I find myself quite lucky to kind of be talking about it. And I'm not a brilliant guy. I just was stubborn, like I said at the beginning, and stuck to a few things which worked.
Mhm.
And so if this dummy can do it, you can, so can you.
Okay. So there's the meetup. There's the whole concept of event modeling as a process. There's event sourcing, CQRS, and event-driven architectures. I think we covered that beautifully, and I loved a bit of nostalgia at the beginning.
Yeah, we all have
So-
our fundamental roots, and I'm glad you brought up the point of how it actually does kind of relate to what
The
we're
Commodore.
doing, yeah, and you know, one of the things about mentioning that CQRS and event sourcing was being done in Warsaw, so far away from exactly where I lived, I've noticed that there's these patterns are there because of
Mhm.
someone calls it co-evolution, like you
Evolution.
different groups that are totally separate come to the same conclusions, and I see that so much with event sourcing. So I know we're doing the right thing, where people left to their own devices with no influence from me or Greg or anyone else have come to the same conclusion in terms of how they put systems together and guarantee you know, the audit trail and all these things that are really good for, you know, high integrity systems.
I think that's a very natural point to
It
wrap
is.
this conversation.
Yeah.
Adam, thank you very much for
Thanks for having
coming
me.
on.
It was really fun, and I'd love to do it again. You should probably join me on the meetup. We could do it the other way around, and I'll ask you the hard questions this time.
We'll talk about that. I would definitely. That's definitely something that's, you know, it's giving me goosebumps right now.
That'll be awesome. So anytime.
Thank you, Adam. To our viewers, this is one of our longer episodes, so thank you for staying with us on the Technologist podcast. If you have any aha moments, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to stay up to date and stay in touch. And until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks.